Hey review family, keep it tight. My name is Jay Morris, the review guy, reviewing music for the love of music, and I'm back again to bring you another video. Welcome back to my weekly series, Metal and Rock Track Roundup, where I go over some of the more high-profile releases throughout the week, give some recommendations. I put all of the links for all of the songs in the description box below so you can go listen to them for yourselves. Let's get right into the video. There are some big releases to talk about in here, but for the most part, surprisingly, I have some more underground releases, which is, funnily enough, some things that some people were talking about and recommending. First up, Forgotten Tomb with Nihlistic Estrangement. This Italian metal band is one that you've most likely heard of. They're a bit of a DSBM band which leans more towards a doom and gloom gothic metal style of black metal as opposed to a very lo-fi and rigid production that you will oftentimes get in the genre. This new track, the self-titled track from a new record that will be dropping in about a month, is very murky and somehow low-key in how brilliantly choking it is. It really nails that forlorn and asphyxiating feeling of drowning, and it's pretty long track, so if you want to get lost in a track and just really take all of the atmosphere in, this is a great place to start. Next up, Ognemöt with The Rise of Cosmopolitans. Discover these guys from the Gore Grinder channel, which I do suggest as they're constantly pumping out new releases, singles, albums, EPs, demos from up-and-coming and previously established bands in the general extreme sphere. They like doing a lot of grindcore and gore grind. This tri-country band fosters a pretty meat and potatoes, D-beat, and crust punk sound. You have some death metal vocals thrown in there. I really enjoyed the production on this track. I think that it does do it a lot of favors that it's not super raw, which comparatively speaking with a lot of the more low-key punk bands and crust punk bands, they'll tend to have a style that is very raw. They like to be very in-your-face and blunt, but these guys really do opt for somewhat of a better production style, which I think does them a lot of justice. Next up, Superhero from Atreyu featuring M. Shadows and Aaron from Under Oath. So it's Under Oath and Avenged Sevenfold and Atreyu coming together, which is pretty cool. This is generally more of what is generally seen as, you know, the whole dad rock stereotype, but I think this track does have a lot to it, especially lyrically. And overall, it's just a really kind-hearted, beautiful track lyrically, even if instrumentally it's not super strong or super sound. Not a big fan of the track from an instrumental point of view, but from a messaging point of view, I think it really does stick the landing quite well, and I think that was what they were going for, so for people to really necessarily be complaining about it, I don't really get that. Next up, Vader with Into Oblivion, probably my favorite track on this whole list. Looking at the list, I would definitely say it probably is. Vader's dropping a new record this year, which I'm pretty excited for. I think generally they're not as quite as well respected as they should be. They started as a thrash metal band, but really rose to prominence as a death metal band, and I think in many ways are overlooked. Their sound is still very reminiscent of the whole 80s death metal and thrash metal scene, but they've been able to adapt to the better production style that you see nowadays. Lots of angular riffs, fuzzed out guitar lines, and a grisly drum sound, and Peter's vocals also remain top notch, and it gets a hell out of Dodge before really spending much time, so definitely check this out if you're going to check out anything from this list. Next up, Galactic Mechanics with Outer World Defense Systems. Shout out to my dude Bloomy over at Underrated Metal Albums who turned me on to this new little 4-track EP from these guys out now. On paper, it's a pretty typical progressive death metal track with a great deal of technicality that'll surely serve as ear candy to those that typically enjoy that type of stuff, but what really gripped me here was certainly the vocal mixing. I love some of the layered vocals, as the shrieks don't really read to me as normal shrieks that you'd hear in, say, a deathcore or a black metal bands in terms of layering with the more usual growls, but have this gargled, gross register to them that I'm digging quite a bit. But overall, if you're a fan of the whole, you know, progressive metal and technical death metal inspired sci-fi sound, check this out. I think it's a must. Next up, Alestorm with Treasure Chest Party Quest. Pirate metal is alive. I mean, Alestorm is single-handedly, by far, the most well-known of the whole pirate metal genre. I mean, they single-handedly rose it to prominence, and they continue to, just because they're fun. They're kind of like Hell Young does with folk music and traditional folk music, but they actually take themselves less seriously. In Alestorm, of course, they just have so much fun. The lyrics on this track are hilarious. The music video is hilarious. They're dropping a new record. I can't promise that I'm going to do a review on it or anything, but it's just a hilarious track. I think their gimmick stomach is wearing a little bit thin in terms of enjoyability, because after a while you kind of reach a point where, you know, you've done about all you can with the sound, and it's hard to see what they're going to do in the future, but hey, I'm curious. And even if I don't review it, of course I'm going to check the record out. It's damn Alestorm. Or some people say Alestorm. Allegaeon with Roundabout. This band's cover of the classic Yes track Roundabout is fucking phenomenal. It's great. I mean, it's epic. This band usually is very technical and melodic and has a death metal sound, but their way of incorporating their own style of death metal instrumentation into the original style is insane. They do it so subtly that it is a very faithful rendition for anyone that's a fan of the original track, while inserting enough to make it their own. I do highly suggest this for fans of Yes, or otherwise just people who want to have an appreciation of the track, because the band does an amazing rendition of it. Next up, Exo Crime with Maelstrom. Bit of a different turn for these guys. I've been aware of them before, but their approach to a more groovy tech death style here works out in their favor a lot. They don't overstay their welcome or get too long-winded, but this features a pretty rough around the edges plain style that I can appreciate quite a bit. Also liking how the vocals don't really swallow the mix and stay as this more slurpy, almost backdrop to the complex playing that you get, but it never reaches the point of being overly technical just to be flashy that it turns into complexity just to be complexity. This isn't as complex as, say, a Tool, let's say. It's not the Fibonacci sequence over here. Next up, Pyrrhon with Another Day in Paradise. This is a really cool discovery that I made this week. I mean, with the edgy sample leading into this track, I was pretty excited. It's a joke, all things considered. Very dark and morbid right off the bat. It does have that kind of metal feel, that lead-in that a lot of bands do in sort of the grind sphere and the death metal sphere. And yeah, this experimental band created a pretty horrific sounding track. Everything from the off-kilter riffage to the spontaneous drumming and straight up freakishly odd and unorthodox vocal style. They put the experiment and experimental, just constant energy for a bit over 6 minutes long. If you want something that is just super odd and has such oddity to the whole sound, it's a big anomaly, but they have enough cohesion to make it somewhat intelligible. The playing, you can tell, it's full of talent. It's bursting with energy. It's bursting with passion. It's bursting with just so much odd feelings that you really wonder how they packed it all in here, but every single second of this track is utilized perfectly. So I am going to shout out an EP with Puta Malaria with the Quarantine EP. Extreme new EP that I want to shout out, as I don't plan on doing a full-length review of it, and it's about the size of a track, considering with barely over 5 minutes it packs in 5 tracks, and it is abrasive in every sense of the word. It's so raw and so noisy, and there's really no cohesion or even any sort of semblance of solid sound here. It's just a wall of fuzz, and I think if you enjoy such a chaotic style, if you're a fan of more grindcore and crust punk and D-beat that has just an extremely low sound that is raw and just so hard to make anything out, so hard to decipher, a super dizzying and intoxicating style, you'll like this quite a bit. Next up, Pharaoh with Intruders. This is power metal that keeps a bit off the camp, which I do enjoy quite a bit, because I generally would say power metal is one of my more least listened to metal genres, simply because I think many of the tracks can just overreach so much production-wise and make everything feel so overly glossy and glitzy, but I think these guys do a good job of finding that middle ground and providing some good substance while sticking to the really high falsetto vocals and larger-than-life lyrics. So check it out if you want something that's not super well produced and glossy as, say, a Dragon Force. Next up, Bear with Kuma, a band I wasn't previously familiar with, but this has been put on my radar and I'm super glad about it. I have heard some people talking about this single. This track is invigorating. It really has a relentless style that gets your blood pumping, very almost demonic with those vocals and constant riffs that sound a bit like a less unmeasured mathcore and closer to a general, very abrasive and chaotic metalcore, pretty heavy like a Converge, but not quite as dense of a production style as Kurt Ballou does. Lots more space in this mix, which it gives things like the bass a chance to really have some breathing room and a very monstrous sound, which is pretty funny, so check it out if you want that, if it sounds interesting to you. And that's gonna about wrap it up. These are the tracks and the little bits of EPs that I thought were pretty interesting this week. week. No huge releases, nothing that I was super head over heels for, but I definitely wanted to get this out and shout out some tracks. Of course, they're all going to be in the description box below, so you guys can go listen to them yourselves. If any of these recommendations really piqued your interest, be sure to let me know. What tracks were you really liking this week? I'd love to hear it in the comment section below. Be sure to like this video if you enjoyed it, subscribe to join the review family today, and smash that notification bell to be notified of my future uploads. You know who it is. My name is Jay Morris, the Review Guy, and I'm signing off saying farewell.